I've been a Google user for 14 years. Gmail, Drive, Photos, Maps, YouTube, the whole ecosystem. And last month, I started deleting all of it. Not because something catastrophic happened, not because I got hacked or had some dramatic falling out. It was quieter than that. It was the slow accumulation of small moments where I realized the relationship I thought I had with Google wasn't the relationship that actually existed. And once I saw that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. This video is me walking you through what I found, why it finally mattered enough to act on, and exactly how I'm replacing every Google service, one by one, with something that doesn't treat my attention and my data as the product being sold. If you're someone who's been on the fence about this, or someone who's never even considered it, stay with me. Because by the end of this, you're going to see your Google account very differently than you do right now. Before I tell you what pushed me over the edge, you need to understand exactly what Google has built, because most people dramatically underestimate it. When most people think about Google data collection, they think about search history, maybe targeted ads. They figure they've got a rough sense of what's happening. They don't. What Google has actually constructed over the past 2 decades is one of the most comprehensive behavioral surveillance infrastructures ever built by a private company. And the scale of it is genuinely difficult to process until you sit down and map it out. Let me show you what that actually looks like in practice. If you have a standard Google account, Google has likely collected your full search history going back years. Every query, every topic, every symptom you searched at 2 in the morning, every relationship problem you typed into that search bar because you didn't know who else to ask. They have your location history, which, depending on your settings, is a precise GPS log of where you've physically been, your home, your doctor's office, your place of worship, your ex's neighborhood, the AA meeting you drove to last spring. They have your email, not just metadata, the content. Google has processed the contents of Gmail for over a decade, and while they announced changes to how they use it, for ad targeting in 2017, researchers at Princeton and security analysts at the Electronic Frontier Foundation have consistently pointed out that the data itself doesn't disappear. It's stored, it's structured, and it feeds systems you never see. Think about that for a second. Your email is arguably the most intimate data stream you generate. Job negotiations, medical results, relationship conversations, financial statements, legal correspondence, all of it sitting in servers owned by a company whose entire business model depends on knowing more about you than you know about yourself. And then there's Google Photos. If you've got auto backup enabled, and Google has made that the default for years, every photo you've taken is sitting in their cloud. Google uses those photos to train computer vision AI systems. They're open about this in their terms of service, buried in language most people scroll past without reading. Researchers at the AI Now Institute have raised specific concerns about how this biometric data, your face, your family's faces, images of your home, feeds into systems whose downstream use cases are opaque to the people who generated the data in the first place. Now add YouTube watch history, add Google Maps timeline, add Chrome browsing history if you're signed in, add your Google Calendar, which contains where you're going and who you're meeting, add your Google Fit or Health Connect data if you've ever used it, add every Google Doc and sheet you've created, add the voice recordings from Google Assistant and every Hey Google trigger your phone picked up. And Google acknowledged in 2019, after a leak revealed contractors were reviewing these recordings, that yes, human reviewers had access to audio clips, not just automated transcription. People listening, when you put all of this together, and actually sit down and pull your Google data export, which you can do through Google Takeout, what you get is not a collection of isolated data points. It's a portrait, a detailed longitudinal portrait of who you are, what you care about, what you're afraid of, what you want, and how you behave when you think nobody is watching, except someone always is. Security researcher Wolfie Crystal, who spent years mapping corporate data ecosystems, described Google's data infrastructure as a behavioral surplus extraction machine, a system designed not just to serve you, but to predict and ultimately influence you. That framing stuck with me, because it reframes the entire relationship. You're not a customer, you're not even really a user. You're a data source with a login. Here's the part that took me the longest to accept. Google isn't a search company, it isn't an email company, and it definitely isn't a maps company. Google is an advertising company. That's not a cynical take. That's what their financial statements say. In 2024, advertising revenue accounted for roughly 77% of Alphabet's total revenue. Everything else, the search engine, Gmail, Maps, Drive, Android, Chrome, YouTube, every single one of those products exists primarily to serve that advertising business. They are data collection instruments dressed up as helpful tools. I'm not saying Google's products aren't useful. They're extraordinarily useful. That's the point. The usefulness is engineered. The convenience is intentional. When Gmail launched in 2004 with a gigabyte of free storage at a time when competitors were offering megabytes, it wasn't generosity, it was acquisition. Get people to move their entire email history into Google's servers and you have continuous, intimate access to their communications for as long as they stay. The switching cost becomes enormous, the data becomes irreplaceable, you become embedded. This is what Shoshana Zuboff, a Harvard Business School professor, called surveillance capitalism in her 2019 book of the same name. The core argument is something I kept coming back to the more I thought about my own Google usage. These companies don't just passively collect data about what you've done. They use that data to predict and subtly shape what you'll do next. Your YouTube recommendations aren't neutral. Your Google search results are personalized. The map route Google suggests isn't just about distance. It factors in behavior patterns and, in some cases, commercial relationships. Every interface is an opportunity to influence the next action you take. And here's what really bothers me about this. They've gotten extraordinarily good at making you feel like the service is working for you, when the service is actually working on you. It's like a casino floor, beautifully designed, endlessly stimulating, completely optimized for one party's benefit. And you're not the house. That analogy clicked for me in a specific way when I read reporting from the Wall Street Journal's investigation into Google's Project Bernanke, an internal program where Google was allegedly leveraging data from its own ad exchange to give its own ad buying tools an advantage, essentially tilting the table in its own favor in ways that advertisers and publishers couldn't see. The DOJ's antitrust case against Google, which produced significant findings in 2024, detailed how Google maintained monopoly control over multiple layers of the digital advertising stack simultaneously. They owned the tools that publishers use to sell ads, the tools that advertisers use to buy ads, and the exchange in the middle where those transactions happened. And they used data flowing through all three to advantage themselves. If you felt like something was off, if you've had that nagging sense that you're giving more than you're getting, you were right to feel that way. The data supports it. Here's what really crystallized it for me personally. I pulled my Google Takeout data about 6 months ago. It's a process that takes a while because the file is enormous. Mine was over 80 gigabytes. I started going through it, and there was a folder called My Activity that contained a structured log of nearly everything I'd done across Google's products going back to 2012. Searches I'd forgotten I'd made, YouTube videos I'd watched at 1 a.m. that I'd never thought about again, location check-ins from a trip in 2015, ads I'd clicked on. There was a document of my life in that folder, reconstructed from signals I'd emitted without thinking, because I trusted that the interface was just a tool and not a recording device. That's when I made the decision. Not in anger. More in this quiet, clear way where I just thought, I don't want this anymore. I want my computer to be my computer again, not a terminal in someone else's data center. All right, let's get into the part that actually matters, because wanting to leave Google and successfully leaving Google are two completely different things. I tried to do this 3 years ago and failed because I underestimated how deeply Google was woven into my daily workflow. So this time I did it methodically. Service by service. I've been at it for about 5 months and I want to walk you through what's actually worked, what was harder than expected, and what I'd do differently if I was starting today. The first thing you need to do before you change anything is download your data. Go to Google Takeout at takeout.google.com and export everything, all of it. This will take anywhere from a few hours to a few days depending on how much you have. Save it somewhere safe. An external drive, ideally. This is your archive and your insurance. Don't skip this step. People who skip this step end up regretting it when they realize they can't access photos from 8 years ago or emails they needed for reference. Once you have your data, the migration itself follows a natural order based on what causes the least disruption first and works toward the most disruptive changes last. Start with search. This is the easiest swap, and it sets the psychological tone for the whole process. The alternative I moved to is Kagi. It's a paid search engine at about $5 a month, and I want to be upfront about that cost because I'm not going to pretend there are perfect free alternatives. There are. DuckDuckGo and Brave Search are genuinely good, and I used DuckDuckGo for 2 years before switching to Kagi. But if you want search results that are actively filtered to remove SEO garbage, have no ad targeting, and come from a business model where you're the customer paying for a service, rather than the product generating revenue, Kagi is worth the cost. The search quality is legitimately excellent. I'll put DuckDuckGo and Brave Search as the free options. Either is a massive improvement over feeding your queries to Google. If you're on Chrome right now, open a new tab and take a look at your address bar. Every search you type in there that goes to Google is a data point. Switching your default search takes 30 seconds. On any browser, go to Settings, find Search Engine, and change it. That's it. You don't have to do anything else today, just start there. The browser itself is the next step. Chrome is deeply integrated with Google's data pipeline. It reports browsing data back to Google when you're signed in, and even features like safe browsing, while genuinely useful for security, send URL data to Google servers in standard mode. The alternative I switched to is Firefox. I know Firefox has had some rough years, but the current version is fast, the extension support is excellent, and the Mozilla Foundation, whatever its imperfections, is a nonprofit whose stated mission is an open, private internet, not a surveillance business. If you prefer a Chromium-based browser, Brave is solid. It has aggressive tracking protection built in and a business model that doesn't depend on selling your data. Install uBlock Origin regardless of which browser you use. It's free, maintained by an independent developer, and it blocks a significant portion of tracking scripts across the web. Now, email. This is where people get stuck, and I understand why. Gmail is genuinely excellent software. It's fast, the spam filtering is remarkable, and if you've had your Gmail address for a decade, it's tied to everything. I'm not going to tell you this is easy because it isn't. But here's what actually works. The service I moved to is Proton Mail, based in Switzerland, governed by Swiss privacy law, end-to-end encrypted by default for emails between Proton users, and audited by independent security researchers. The basic plan is free. The paid plan, which gives you custom domain support and more storage, is about $4 a month. If you want to use your own domain, yourname@yourdomain.com, that's the move. It means your email address isn't tied to any specific provider. So if you ever want to switch again, you just change where the domain points. You own the address. That's the long-term play. The migration process for email is unglamorous. Set up your new address, then spend a few weeks doing two things simultaneously. Send an update to your important contacts, and go through your Gmail and identify which services and accounts are registered to that email. Update them one at a time. I kept a spreadsheet. It took about 3 weeks of occasional effort to get through everything important. I still have my Gmail active as a forwarding address. For anything I missed, and I'll keep it active for about a year before fully closing it, think about what that migration process actually means, though. You're auditing your entire digital life. Every account, every subscription, every service. That audit itself is valuable. I found subscriptions I'd forgotten about, accounts I no longer needed, services I'd signed up for once and never used again. Use a password manager if you don't already have one. Bitwarden is free, open source, and excellent because this migration process is the perfect time to generate unique, strong passwords for everything, rather than reusing the same few passwords across accounts. Google Drive and Docs is a real one for anyone who does knowledge work. I lived in Google Docs for years. The collaboration features are excellent. Here's what I moved to. Proton Drive for cloud storage. It's end-to-end encrypted and comes bundled with the Proton plan. For document editing, I moved to LibreOffice for offline work, which is free and open source and handles most document formats well. And for collaborative work, I've been using Notion for some things and CryptPad for anything sensitive. CryptPad is end-to-end encrypted, collaborative, free for basic use, and runs on open source software. It's not as polished as Google Docs, but it works, and nobody's reading your documents. If you're deep in Google Workspace for work, and I know some of you are because your employer controls the account, that's a different and harder conversation. You may not have control over your work email or docs. What you can control is your personal account, your personal data, and which tools you use in your personal life. Start there. Google Photos is emotionally the hardest for most people because photos are irreplaceable. The solution I'm using is a self-hosted photo library using an application called Image. I recognize that self-hosting is not for everyone. It requires a bit of technical comfort and some hardware investment. If self-hosting isn't your thing, the alternatives I'd recommend are Ente Photos. End-to-end encrypted, open source with apps for iOS and Android, or Proton Photos, which is still in development but coming. iCloud Photos is also significantly better on privacy than Google Photos if you're in the Apple ecosystem, though it's not end-to-end encrypted by default for all content. The important thing is to turn off Google Photos auto backup before you do anything else, download your photos through Takeout, and get them onto hardware you control. Google Maps is the one I get the most pushback on, and look, I'm going to be honest with you. No alternative is as comprehensive as Google Maps, not yet. What I use now is a combination of organic maps for offline navigation. It's based on OpenStreetMap data, completely free, no account required, no tracking, and Apple Maps when I need more real-time data and I'm on my phone. For general discovery and searching for places, I use OpenStreetMap directly through the browser. It's not perfect. There are places that aren't well mapped, businesses without dated information, but it's better than it was 2 years ago, and the OpenStreetMap community is active and growing. YouTube is the one I haven't fully solved. I'll be transparent about that. I watch YouTube, I still watch YouTube, but I've changed how I interact with it significantly. I'm not logged in. I use FreeTube on desktop. It's an open source YouTube client that lets you watch videos and manage subscriptions. Without YouTube logging your watch history or serving you algorithmic recommendations. On mobile, I use NewPipe if you're on Android. You get the content without the behavioral profiling. It's not a perfect solution, and I recognize YouTube is functionally a Google property regardless of how you access it. But not being logged in and not feeding the recommendation algorithm is a meaningful improvement over the default. Google Assistant and Android are longer conversations. If you're on Android, you have options. Graphene OS is an open source Android build with exceptional security and privacy that runs on Pixel devices, and it lets you use Android apps without Google services. It requires some technical comfort to set up. But the Graphene OS community documentation is thorough. If you're not ready for that, at minimum, you can go into your Android settings and revoke Google Assistant permissions, disable Google's advertising ID and privacy settings, and disable location history. These aren't perfect solutions, but they meaningfully reduce the data stream. Now, I want to be clear about something important before we move on. This migration guide is focused on personal privacy and data autonomy. Some Google services, particularly in enterprise or professional environments, have legitimate use cases that make this kind of migration impractical or even inadvisable. If your employer requires Google Workspace, if your team's entire workflow depends on collaborative Google tools, if you're using Google Cloud infrastructure professionally, this video isn't telling you to blow that up. Make decisions based on your actual situation. Nothing in this video should be taken as advice to disable legitimate security features. Google's security protections for account access, two-factor authentication, and similar features are worth keeping until you've fully transitioned away. Don't delete your account before you've moved everything out. I want to be honest with you about something. Deleting my Google account didn't make me invisible, and it didn't solve everything. I know that might sound like a strange thing to say after spending 20 minutes telling you why I'm doing it, but I think it's important to be clear-eyed about what this actually is and what it isn't. This isn't a magic solution. There are 1,000 other data brokers, 1,000 other tracking systems, 1,000 other ways your digital behavior is observed and commodified. Meta knows more about you than you probably want to think about. Your ISP logs your traffic. Data brokers have profiles on most American adults that contain information they bought, inferred, and aggregated from dozens of sources. Leaving Google doesn't clean all of that up. What leaving Google does is remove one of the most comprehensive and intimate surveillance relationships in your life. It means the company with the single most detailed portrait of your behavior no longer has access to the live data stream that portrait is built from. That's not nothing. That's actually significant. But it's a step, not a destination. Here's the bigger principle that I keep coming back to, and it's the reason I'm making this change in 2026, rather than treating it as something I'll get to eventually. The direction things are moving is not toward more privacy. Every major tech company is moving toward deeper integration of AI systems that require more data, processed more continuously, across more surfaces of your life. Google's Gemini integration into Gmail means an AI is processing your emails not just to serve ads, but to provide assistive features. Google's AI mode in search is designed to keep you inside Google's ecosystem rather than clicking through to the actual websites where information lives. The ambient data collection is getting more sophisticated, not less. You don't have to accept the defaults. That's the thing I want you to take away from this more than anything else. These defaults were chosen for a reason, and that reason wasn't your benefit, it was theirs. Every setting that was turned on without your explicit informed consent is a choice someone else made for you. And you are allowed to undo those choices. There are millions of people making this transition right now. Not because they're paranoid, not because they're conspiracy theorists, not because they want to live off the grid. Because they sat down and looked clearly at the exchange they'd been participating in for years and decided the terms weren't acceptable anymore. You're not unusual for feeling this way. You're paying attention. I started this video by telling you I'd been a Google user for 14 years. What I didn't say is that most of those years were genuinely good. The products worked well, the services were useful. I'm not retroactively angry about all of it. But the relationship has changed, or more accurately, my understanding of the relationship has changed. And what I understand now is that I was never the customer. I was the supply. That's the line for me. And wherever your line is, whether this video is the thing that makes you start the migration tomorrow, or the thing that makes you turn off location history and call it good for now, or even just the thing that makes you actually read the terms of service for the first time, drawing that line deliberately with full information is the whole point. If you want to start somewhere today, do this. Go to my account at google.com, click on Data and Privacy, and spend 15 minutes actually reading what's in there. Look at your web and app activity. Look at your location history. Look at what's being used to personalize your ads. Just look at it. That's step one. Not deleting anything, not panicking, just looking at what the relationship actually is. If this video is the kind of thing you want to see more of, real migrations, real trade-offs, honest breakdowns of what works and what doesn't. Hit subscribe. I'm documenting this whole process as I go through it. And the next video is going to cover the Android side of this in detail, including Graphene OS and what it actually takes to de-Google a phone in a way that's livable day to day. Drop a comment and tell me which Google service you're least willing to give up. Genuinely curious because it's different for everyone, and the answers help me figure out what to cover next. I read all of them. See you in the next one.